Have you ever wondered how the wealthy stay wealthy and why most Americans have a difficult time trying to stay ahead financially? Well, I'm here with a very, very special human being, Mr. Jerry Van Essen, and he's going to teach me and you the secrets that only 1% of Americans are leveraging today that will keep them wealthy for many generations. How are you doing, Jerry?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm so glad to have you here and so glad to be a part of this conversation with you.
Happy to be
As I
here.
always say, I feel very privileged to be in the room or in the conversations or in your brain. So I'm really excited to just talk through and quote unquote pick your brain about what this thing is. What is this big secret that most people don't know about that's keeping us struggling, keeping us behind, and just most importantly, that could benefit us as well. So I got a series of questions that I'm going to ask you today. And hopefully we can walk away from this discussion benefiting, and those that are listening will be able to get something out of it. So as I get started, my name's Keenan Roberts. And for those of you who don't know, we're going to get into just talking through what does it mean to have a trust and what exactly is estate planning. So my very first question to you, Jerry, is can you tell us how you first got interested and what sparked your journey into this whole field of estate planning?
Well, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were doing everything just like everyone else. We were running with the same education that everybody coming out of high school and whatnot were working through. About that time, my grandfather passed away. And after hearing some of the information that had came out about his wealth, it really surprised most of us because we presumed that he was a very modest person. And so that struck my interest, and it turned out that he was working in and through trusts. And so being he was gone, none of his children could tell me how that worked. So I went looking. So that led me to going to school, going back to school, and it was called the School of Law at the time. And we were basically looking at different trusts and how they worked, how they flowed. And that eventually ran across the trust that we work in today, the Irrevocable Asset Protection Trust.
Okay, see now you're getting a little bit ahead. Okay. So are there any disclaimers or anything that we want to go into before I go on and continue?
Oh, absolutely. I am not an attorney or a lawyer, and I am not a CPA, and none of this can be construed as legal or financial advice.
Awesome. You know it's real when you got to give disclaimers, right? So for those that are listening, stay tuned because I have a feeling we're about to get dropped with some serious bombs here. So what is a trust first and foremost, and why is it important?
A trust is an entity that is developed to safeguard assets in the sense of it is a contractual agreement that you enter into that the trustees, the assets are placed within trust, and the trustees then use those assets as you would use your personal assets, but they are no longer within your reach. And so it gives you great asset protection. It also gives you peace of mind that if something happens and you don't wake up tomorrow morning or don't come home, that your family is taken care of, that the trust stuff does not go through probate.
Wow. Yeah, this whole trust world, it's since I've met you and your wife, it's really transformed just the way that I think about really my own lifestyle and how I've been doing things, throughout my life. I'm 27 years old. I'm still young, but like I lived a significant amount of life that I feel like, how am I just now meeting someone like you, and how is this information just now arriving to my knowledge? So it's very interesting that I have to ask, what is a trust. From my perspective, it's interesting how rare it is that people know what it is and really how to use it and why it's important. So thank you for sharing that. For someone that just learned about a trust, or they don't know too much, why why leverage it? Like, what are the main advantages of using a trust?
Well, the largest, as we had spoke of earlier, is peace of mind that if something happens, when your family is grieving, that is a time to grieve. It's not a time to have to sit in some attorney's office and fill out forms and figure out all your assets, because if you pass without a trust, and let's say you just have a will, then everything is going to go through probate. And in probate, everything becomes public, and it just really becomes a three-ring circus for your family. And that is the time that your family is supposed to be grieving for you. And so that is by itself huge, because none of us are guaranteed an hour from now, let alone tomorrow or beyond. So that is first probably the largest asset of having a trust, because like I said, nothing will go through probate. It's not in your name anymore. Just like the revocable was like an LLC or a disregarded LLC. An irrevocable is totally opposite. It is not you at all. It is its own entity. It has its own bank accounts that you would set up. The trustees are the players that are doing the business. They're the ones that are charged with taking care of the assets of the trust and doing the business, buying, selling, leasing. So working in and through an irrevocable trust, it files its own tax return, a 1041, versus having everything flow into your taxes. And it has certain tax advantages where revocable has zero, because again, it flows right back onto your 1040. Once you understand an irrevocable, because there's a ton of fear that people have put out about irrevocable. It's the last thing you want is one of those, because once you have an irrevocable, you can't change it. Well, that is just fear mongering, because yeah, the grantor can't change anything, and the rule book, if you will, can't be changed. But whatever's in the trust, as far as if it was a business or a asset, or they can be bought, sold, managed in a way that they make money. There's nothing that you can't not do, except you have to pay attention to the rule book. The rule book is the rule book. There's certain things you as a trustee have to abide by, and the last thing you ever want to do is be fraudulent or do things in such a way that you're doing them for yourself. It's for the trust and for the beneficiaries of the trust.
Yeah, that's completely different than what most people would think, right? You mentioned there's a lot of fear mongering about the irrevocable and stay away, right? But it sounds like there's a reason for that, and people are misinformed of those reasons. When I learned more about the trust and sort of the structure, my next question is, how does the structure of a trust or trusts work? Like, if I wanted to get started today and I said, all right, I don't know anything about trust, but I watched this video. I learned a little bit of something about the trust, and I want to get started. I don't understand the structuring. For those that are listening, how do you structure that?
Okay. Well, the first thing you want to do is put together a list of the beneficiaries, who the beneficiaries are, and if the beneficiaries are all going to be co-equal, because there's units of beneficial interest. And in those units, you can assign how many units you want per beneficiary. So there's some leeway there. So the first thing, like I said, you want to do is make a list of all the beneficiaries that you wish to be the beneficiaries of the trust. You can have 1 to 2 trustees, but we always like to see 3, because let's say you and your wife are trustees, and you could think one way, she could think another way. The third trustee is kind of the tiebreaker. But at the same time, if you were both in the vehicle and for whatever reason that vehicle didn't make it to its destination and both of you perished, well, then there is someone else to step in that has an idea of what's going on, what you would want, or how this is working, because they were a trustee as well. So they're a part of the trust. They would then take over for you. And of course, there's going to things that would need to be changed because you're gone, you were passed away, but then other trustees would come on in your place.
Wow. That opens up another conversation, because there might be people that have trust issues. You're really going to have someone you really do trust that is involved in this with you. If you really want to do things this way, it sounds like, right? Maybe I'm wrong. I know anybody can just get anybody to do this, but I heard you say that you want to make sure that a trustee knows how to be a good trustee. And so that tells me you don't just want to pick anyone. And then the person that you pick, they've got to know your best interest.
They do.
So that's what it sounds like, right? So
They do.
yeah, that's another topic. Can you tell me about the different roles? You mentioned beneficiary, you mentioned grantor, you mentioned trustee. What do those terms mean, and what are those 3 different roles play in all of this?
In the setting up of an irrevocable trust, the grantor or creator is the person that is coming in and doing the creating of the trust. So the creator would meet up with us, and we would sit down and go through the paperwork and find out who all the players are on the trust. And then once the paperwork is put together, we would sit down with the trustees and the grantor / creator and put it all together, put the beneficiaries in, sign all the paperwork up, and from there on, the grantor has to walk away, or the creator has to walk away. They have nothing more to do with it. Now it's up to the trustees to run the trust according to how the trust should be ran. And like you said earlier, the best people that you have to work with you, the better things will work.
Awesome. Almost sounds like a really tight team, really good team, and all the players need to know how to play well and understand the rules of this quote unquote game. Thank you for elaborating on that. So for those that are listening, are people using these like commonly? If not, who is using these? Like, I feel like there's more to this. And again, I feel like my whole brain has exploded since I've come across this topic, but I find it surprising that most people aren't talking about it. So just curious to understand or know if you have any examples of people that are leveraging this. Maybe they're well known, maybe they're not, but would love to hear some stories if you have any of that.
Oh, absolutely. Most people don't leverage a trust because they don't know, or they've heard about a trust, but that's about all they know about it. They feel they're expensive, and they just don't know what to do. So, and they know it costs a lot of money to go to the attorney or lawyer or whoever to sit down and go through all this. So then they just put it to the side for another day.
So I heard this story of Ted Kennedy and how he got into this terrible, crazy accident. And basically, to sum up the story, no one could touch him. I mean, I know that sounds bad, right? But is that true? And what happened there? Can you explain that?
Absolutely. For reasons that probably we won't go into, but the evening that he was driving home, that particular evening, his car left the bridge, left the road, and ended up in the river. And the passenger that was with him perished in the river. Ted had made it back out, or Mr. Kennedy, maybe is where I should go with that, made it back out and to shore. And when it was all said and done, the family of the young lady that passed away went after the Kennedys to find out that Ted owned nothing. And so at the end of the day, all they could do was get the insurance of that car and the car itself, because the car was in a trust. And so the car was insured. They got the car, they got the insurance, and they couldn't touch Mr. Kennedy because he did not own it. He was more than likely just the trustee of the trust and had control of the trust asset.
Wow. So that's big right there. We didn't talk much about that, right? I mentioned earlier, I said, have you ever wondered, talking to the audience, to the people that are listening, why the rich stay rich or the wealthy stay wealthy and the Americans, everyday Americans struggle to get ahead? This is a concept that is unfamiliar to a lot of people. You mentioned he didn't own anything. Huh? What is he didn't own anything, right? What is that? What is this concept of owning nothing and controlling everything, and why is it so important, and how does it tie into a trust?
Oh yeah, that came from Mr. Rockefeller, and it's huge in the sense that if you have all the control, I guess I'll spin that backwards. If you had all the control, why would you want any of the liability? So if you can tuck all the ownership into trust and control them from a trustee position, that's the best seat in the arena.
That's the, that's the millionaire. Is that the 1% secret? Is that what people have been waiting to hear? It's a trust. It's a trust. It's an irrevocable trust. To be clear.
To be clear, it is. It's an irrevocable.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so I've also heard this term trio. Did you make that up? Is that something you made up?
Yes, it is.
That's something you made up. Okay, wow. So for those of you that don't know, Jerry and I, we met a little while back, and we've gotten really close. His family's amazing, and they've just been educating little old me about trust, and they keep throwing this word out, trio. And I'm like, wow, what is that? And they've been teaching me what that is. I just found out that Jerry made it up. I told you he was a very special human being, everyone. So can you tell us about the trio and just the concepts of this trio in the trust?
Sure we can. Now, a trio of trusts work independently of each other, but also work through each other. They each have a different function to make it a strong environment. Each one helps protect the other.
Okay, interesting. That's very interesting. So we won't go too deep in the weeds on that yet, just because this is high level, right? But there's a couple questions I have around trust, and one of them is, and you mentioned it a little bit. We don't have to go too far, but just really want to understand, how does this affect the world of taxes, right? Like, how does that work?
When you're working in and through trusts, again, none of this is yours. It's a fairly simple tax return, and it has ways that it can reduce its taxes to a lower state than what you can on your 1040.
Interesting. Okay, so that makes sense. So essentially, I'd actually save money in the world of taxes because everything's being operated through the trust.
Absolutely, yes.
Wow, impressive. Okay, it can sound quite complex for some people, right? Even for me, it took a little bit for me to for the light bulbs to start going off. What would you say for someone who's feeling a bit overwhelmed just with the idea of trust? They're putting it off. They say, oh, I'll wait till I have more assets before I get into that, or maybe I'll use that strategy later in life, or it's just too much for me right now. What would you say to that person that's feeling that way, and they're just kind of blown back by the idea of setting up a trust?
I would tell them that they can't afford to wait, because if something happens and you don't come home today, or you don't wake up tomorrow morning, that will cost your family more than you'll know. It creates a lot of controversy in families when one passes away and the estate isn't in place and settled. But it's not really that complex. It sounds like it is, but once you learn and understand how to be a trustee, we teach you how to be a really good trustee and how to work through them. and to feel comfortable. After a little bit of time, it's just like anything when you start tying your shoe for the very first time. That was, oh, we got to go around and through and all that. But after a very short amount of time, once you understood it and learned it, I mean, you can tie your shoe and chew bubble gum and have a conversation at the same time. So it becomes very fluent.
Okay, that's amazing. I love the answer because you're absolutely right. It's like learning how to ride a bike. It's like you get the training wheels on and then you take the training wheels off and you're coasting. I like that a lot. You mentioned an analogy before when you first shared this information with me about a vehicle. Can you share that with the listeners about how you would liken a trust unto real life, or what it's like not having a trust?
Oh, sure. It's like reckless driving if you're not working in and through a trust. You have no idea the boundaries you're pushing. You're fast and furious in one direction to make profit or to make money for the family, get ahead in life. But at the same time, I compared it to reckless driving because if something happens to you, the whole thing's in vain. You will more than likely, either through a lawsuit or through death, lose a very large portion of it. But a trust is kind of like putting it in a vault. You will keep what you earn.
I like that. I like that. So, any final thoughts? Any last words that you might have for our listeners before we wrap this conversation up, Jerry?
It's better not to put this off. It's better to head on right into this and learn about it, because the longer you have an asset like this in your pocket, the better it is for you and your family.